me and IEEE 802.11i, which was the security enhancements to the Mac we did a couple years ago.
That would be fixing web.
Yeah, that would be fixing web, right. And so I felt Russ would be a good representative because he also is very, very active in the IETF. At the time that I approached him, he was the... Hey, great. So we'll deal with that in a second. Russ was the chair of the, or excuse me, the security area director, correct? And Russ is no longer the security area director. As of last Wednesday, Russ is the chairman of the IETF. So we have a luminary on the panel. So.
I apologize in advance.
So the way this is my one and only slide, and it was created about 5 minutes ago as we walked in the room. The way this started is this gentleman and I were at the summit.
We have to recreate this.
Yeah, okay. We have to recreate this. We're at the summit
At DEF CON.
At DEF CON, and I walked up to Render and we started talking about CalPatty, which is a tool which does an offline dictionary tag against the WPA passphrase. And you know, nice piece of work and so forth and so on. And you know, by the way, we saw this coming and anticipated it, and there's a white paper out that documents that if you're interested. And his basic response was,
what the hell are these guys thinking in the standards bodies?
so you go.
Of course, so as usual, I end up putting my foot in my mouth because, you know, Al puts up his hand and it's like, yeah, I was on that standards body. So I'm like, okay, what's the next step? Do I start running? How does this work?
He is bigger than you.
Most people are. So the whole thing started just, you know, I go talk to Al, put my foot in my mouth, but the ensuing conversation, because he's like, no, you know, I want to answer that. This is actually, you know, he actually had some really good answers for me and answered a lot of other questions. And just, you know, we were talking about it afterwards, and it's like we wanted to share, you know, this kind of information with everybody. And, you know, we just built up a drunken conversation into a convention talk. So, all right.
So, what were we thinking? And so I guess Render's big question was, how in the world could we spend, what, 3 years, Russ?
Yeah.
3 years working on 11i and still leave a TKIP denial of service attack, still leave unprotected management frames, still leave an offline dictionary attack against the WPA phrase, right?
My whole perspective.
Didn't find all the stuff we left yet.
That's comforting. No, my perspective is, you know, end user. You know, we're sitting here, we got jobs, you know, we're pushing bits around, you know, secure and stuff, and some group high and mighty with, you know, letters and numbers says, you know, we are the IETF or IEEE or whatever, you know, we've determined this is the standard, and it's, you know, handed down, you know, however the chain is, and suddenly, you know, we're the ones that are left to implement it, we're left to run it, but yeah, we never see up into that, you know, Crystal Palace up there. We don't know really what's going on. So as a user, I'm sitting here thinking, there's a wonderful line in 802.11i dealing with Michael countermeasures. Every frame has a checksum attached to it, so that if there's more than 2 bad checksums within 60 seconds on a WPA2 protected network, the radio turns off for 60 seconds while it recalculates everything and
The spec says it's
supposed to. Okay. But it says because, and when the access point goes down for these countermeasures, the access point sends out a frame, you know, a Michael countermeasures frame saying, you know, I've gone down for this reason, sends it out to all the clients. There's this wonderful line in the standard that says, you know, essentially, because we cannot authenticate the validity of this frame, we're just going to ignore it and keep trying to connect to this access point anyways, even though we have already been told it's down. Which sounds like a lovely way to slip in a replacement of your own. You know, it just, they built in a DOS attack as far as I can see. So what were you thinking?
So you want, as the resident cryptographer,
Just
you want
that one.
Yeah, just that one.
Actually, no. Well, I think it's, you need to start.
Oh, and feel free to shout out things like, this is just a drunken conversation. bigger audience, bigger number of participants.
All right, we were thinking a lot of different things, but you have to understand context.
Can I slip in a lesson?
Sure.
Every time you go to an IEEE meeting in particular, or standards body meeting, you see all these people around you from, they're all there theoretically as individuals, not as representatives as their companies or their institutions, theoretically.
I'll build on that point.
But you have to ask yourself, why is this person here? So I work for ICSA Labs. Why were we there? We had 3 people that participated actively in the committee. Well, it's real simple. We wanted to build a line of business testing these products as they made it into the market. They weren't secure by design to begin with. We felt like we needed to participate in the standards body effort so we'd understand the specification and therefore be in a position to test it. Didn't work out very well. But that's why we were there. Russ, do you remember?
I remember exactly why I was there.
Russ, here's more. I asked Russ this question. Russ, who was an employee of RSA Labs at the time,
right.
Why were you there?
I was there because the standard used RC4, which was invented by RSA, and by Ron Rivest, who was affiliated with RSA, and Cisco called my boss, Bert Kaliski, the chief scientist of RSA, and said, your broken crypto algorithm is causing this problem. The algorithm was fine. It was everything that the IEEE had put around it that was broken. And so I was sent to go defend the honor of RSA. And so that every time somebody, said, WEP is bad, which was completely true, they wanted the message to be, but the problem wasn't RSA. So that's why I was sent there. And then what I learned when I got there was that they had a huge problem and everybody was very afraid of the first recall ever happening. Basically, imagine, when your car has a part in it that is safety critical and it doesn't work, what happens? You go back to the dealer and they replace that part. They were very afraid that every NIC that had been shipped that implemented WEP was going to get replaced for free. Okay, there was the motive. Okay.
But what did you say?
But it took 3 years to fix anyway.
So that's another frustration.
That's right. No. So, so the competing interests here, right? One is we want to fix it the absolute best way that we can, and the other is we want to fix it fast so we'll stop reading about it in the press. And the other is we want to fix it, and we want to fix it in a way that no new hardware is needed. Yes.
Let's get this a little back on track. You implemented a countermeasure for a bad integrity check.
Yep.
You didn't put an integrity check on the countermeasure?
Because if you start... You're right. That's true. And the reason that was done is if you look at the complexity that would have been added to do that, it was clear that all that was going to happen is more overhead in the key management and really no gain. So the bottom...
Well, first of all, you have to remember something about wireless networks. Anybody that tells you that a wireless network is robust is kidding you. Okay? You want to deny service to a wireless network?
Go out on a microwave.
Go out on bulk trash day, pick up a microwave in the street, bust the door with a rock, crank that rascal on. Don't stand in front of it, but you're not going to get any wireless traffic.
That's the nice thing about the microwave attack. It is self-limiting.
So as a result, what we ended up with was a near-term solution and a long-term solution, which are marketed as WPA, WPA2, which have to do with what's the best I can do that will work on all the vendors' shipped hardware. Now,
we still left some of them.
We ended up having to jettison a couple, but the goal was to find a solution that would work on all the legacy hardware, and we ended up making it work on all the big guys' legacy hardware. And because it was impossible to meet the original goal.
Before you go down, that's something you need to understand between the IETF and the IEEE. The IETF, you can show up and you can vote. IEEE, they have this very complex set of rules that you have to pretty much be anointed by before you're able to vote.
Oh, it's not that.
Well, you have to attend 75% of the last meeting. So you have to attend 3 of the last 4 meetings and attend 50% of the sessions of that group in each of those meetings.
You have to be awake for them, though.
And these they have meetings. No.
You have to sign in.
You have to have a little web, scraper that logs you in.
You have to be awake enough to log in every
But the point is, they have
Every
these meetings
couple
every 2 months, and they last 5 days. A small company, an individual, is
in the freaking morning.
yeah, they're engineers, so they get up at 8 in the morning too. A small company, as an individual, is not going to be able to really have any impact in the IEEE unless you have a big company behind you. And so this is why
The little guys
the little companies were left behind in this fix, because the big guys, Cisco, Gear, they have a block of 70 guys. They on their cell phones, they say, "Hey, we're having a vote," right? And the density of the room increases exponentially.
I'll tell you, it gets worse than that, in the sense like we were having a vote of whether to use a patented mode or a totally available mode for what's known as WPA2. And a couple of the big guys had already paid their royalty fees, so they didn't want the other guys to be able to compete without having to enjoy the same payment.
Well, but it wasn't, and clearly one guy has the patent.
It was very complicated,
It's more,
but I
yeah,
wasn't going to
more
get there. It turns out there were 3 folks who had patents, and one guy was saying, all you have to do is pay me, I'll pay the other guys, and a bunch of us were skeptical. So here we are, and we're trying to figure out how this is all going to get sorted out. So someone makes a motion that the vote be deferred till a particular time. That vote passes. So now, the real vote is going to happen at a particular time. About 2 minutes before that vote, in a room about like this, lots of chairs empty. Time of the vote, every chair is full, standing room only. Take the vote. The ballot hands are counted. Poof, everybody left. So the guys had, there was all kinds of stuff going on to make sure that your hardware that you either are already shipping or is late in the design phase is not wrecked by some decision that a bunch of people made. So this is a symptom of the 802 space is the chip vendors have the biggest say, because the reason is they send the most people and they coerce their partners into coming and supporting the votes, the strategic votes in the same way.
But one should think that the consumer should be the one to make those ultimate decisions.
Preach it, brother. Preach it. Sorry. Come to the meeting.
Okay, when's the next meeting? Where's the next meeting?
You can come to the meeting, but you can't vote.
You can't vote.
I can't vote.
You can't vote at the first meeting. Well, wait a minute now. In the IEEE, you can't vote. In the ITF,
You never vote.
you never vote. The IEEE is Robert's Rules of Order, formal membership and qualification of voters, and voting.
You do have to use the mics, otherwise nothing goes onto the tape.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll try to be better. In the IEEE, it's all relatively formal. In the IETF, your voice is heard, and it's not ruled by Robert's rules, but by consensus, right?
But where is the next meeting?
Rough consensus. Rough consensus.
No.
The meetings are open to anyone. All you have to do to become a voting member of the IEEE is show up. They're relatively...
Where?
Which part of it?
IEEE802.org. They have to go to the website.
Physically where?
It's almost never, it's never in the same place twice.
Okay, when I get home from this thing, it's going to be craft dinner for about the next 3 months to save up for DEF CON. And looking at the website, it's like Houston, Seattle, San Francisco, Prague or whatever.
Go back to the comment about the little guys participating in the IEEE meeting.
Bingo. How are the little guys supposed to do this when, yeah.
Well, you can, and there are individuals who do participate, but they find a sponsor. Russ, for the past, 2-3 years now, you've been an individual consultant.
So yeah, and that's another interesting little thing about the IEEE is you'll see a lot of consultants running around. No offense here, Russ, because I know you weren't one of these guys, but it'll say XYZ Incorporated on the badge, but they're really being paid by one of the big guys, and a lot of times the big guys will use these small individual consultants to derail a particular aspect of the standard.
They're hiring
it-
Ronin.
in a way without,
So they're hiring Ronin.
So it doesn't taint their brain.
Exactly. It gives them deniability, So,
Question over
anyway.
here.
So it seems like there are a lot of folks at the standard body who are there to satisfy their own objective. I want to make sure that my company doesn't look bad. I want to make sure
Or my
that I
company
don't look
doesn't
bad.
get screwed over
Or
because
I want to
their
inject
hardware's
bad
up.
stuff here because is there anybody there taking ownership for, hey, I actually want to make something that works?
Or you left one out, or I want to get my company's intellectual property in the standard as a must and collect royalties.
The people are there to make things work because they want to make money, right? I mean, that's the fundamental goal of the standard is for these guys to be able to make money, whether by having their IP, included into the standard so they can get a recurring revenue tail, from the patent royalties, or to, allow their design to have some advantage. The standards are not for the people. They're not for the people that are going to be using this stuff, right? It's so the companies that are there participating in the standard can make money. And the IEEE along the same line makes money. That's why they do it.
Question?
So I have a very rookie question here, right? Doesn't this define the whole purpose of a standard body? Why can't the vendors just have a working group and decide the standards as opposed to a neutral?
No such thing as an open standard.
Repeat the
Right,
question.
Okay.
Standards are not open.
Okay, so the question was, doesn't this defeat the whole purpose of having a standards body? Isn't the whole point to generate something that people want to use? And the answer is yes and no. Obviously, .11 has been very successful. Something was developed that people want to use. You've drugged this access point in here with a SSID of ShmooCon for a reason, right? It's working.
Been attacked all weekend.
But you put it up there because people wanted connectivity.
But what
It's
brand
work.
access point is it, and how many of you have the same brand name card, and how many of you are having interoperability problems?
None of you are having interoperability problems.
It works, doesn't it?
Right. And so the primary objective is being met.
Yeah.
But wait a minute,
So
there's a second half to the answer.
We're all equally broken is the point you're making.
Everything's equally
No,
broken.
that's because you don't understand what a standard happens. A standard happens when all of the participants are equally unhappy. Right? It's true. There's no way that you're going to have a situation where one guy goes in, he's got the perfectly architected solution, and he sells it to everyone else. If that were to happen, that would be called, a consortium or something to that effect, where some large company, brought in all their shill customers and. That's not what it's about. Now, with the IETF, we really want to get perspectives from everyone, and we allow participants who are mail list only participants. And that is the attempt to make sure that it's not just the big companies' voices are heard. And sometimes it causes us great pain when, to pick a crypto example, Peter Gutman, University of Auckland, hasn't come to a meeting ever post these, these issues, and you got to go, is he just being grumpy or is he being right? And you have to figure that out.
Question?
Usually Peter's right.
Are we done talking about micro countermeasures for a minute? Can I use the mic? Sure. I want to make sure I get this.
Okay. Yes.
Josh, so I had a question, but first I wanted to read something from the 802.11 specification. So
Wait a minute. You've read the spec?
I have,
Raise
yes.
your hand if you've read the spec.
Chapter and verse.
How many of you actually understood it?
All of it.
So this piece is prominently displayed in Annex H, Section 4, subsection 1, okay? Of 11I.
Me too.
A key generated from passphrase of less than about 20 characters is unlikely to deter attacks.
Yes.
Could the panel discuss what the actual key length is, that is the minimum for the PSK?
I'm moving over here.
Minimum? All right, now you need some context on this one too. So what was happening at the time with web?
What's the number? Quit backpedaling.
Let him.
Not backpedaling. This is called, this is, in my view, incremental improvement. All right, where we were with WEP was the fact that the standard said nothing about PSK. Not a single word. So one vendor generated keys by taking the ASCII string that was typed in and dropping it into the key register.
Which is why Apple wouldn't work with Linksys. And
Exactly.
vice versa.
Another vendor took the hex of what was typed in and dropped it into the key register. Those two will never, ever interoperate. So what we were trying to do was recognize that we had to say something so that interop could occur without having to go the full way to creating a spec that really had absolutely nothing to do with the radio.
But wait a minute.
There was disagreement on where that balance point was, and what you read is where it ended up.
So let's take 2 steps back and say your question, or someone's question, was what is the recommended key length, or the recommended way to do business is with 1x. Okay, and the passphrase construct is there as.
That's not the question. The question is, the specification states that a minimum key length of a key length less than 20 characters is unlikely to withstand attack, and that's because it's generally accepted that there's 2.5 bits of entropy per character.
Yep, and do the math.
No problem there.
Right.
What is the minimum length of a passphrase?
There is not one in.
There is a minimum.
There is not one in the IEEE spec.
Exactly.
In the Wi-Fi Alliance interoperability test plan, there is a, I want to say, 8 printable character minimum, which is the worst number you could pick in the world. PASSWORD, 8 characters.
Which is why they picked it too.
But at least it's not CISCO.
but at least there is a minimum that someone put. And why is there not a minimum in the spec? Frankly, because the grumpy people in the room lost the vote to the
I mean, there was a huge debate about trying to come up with a Soho. There was a huge debate about trying to create a Soho 1X, right? Why is it that, let's not even use passwords. 1X is there. You can make a Soho version of it. And, the big vendors just didn't want it, right? And
Microsoft didn't want it.
Microsoft.
Big vendor.
Microsoft doesn't want a lot of it.
The denial of service attack.
They want our money.
The big counter from a number of people on the denial of service attack was, well, I can turn my microwave on and do a denial of service attack, so why do I need to worry about it? It's over and over. I mean, I was nearly standing on a table at one point about this, and the big vendors were basically saying, well, it's RF. We don't need to worry about denial of services in RF. Right.
You can't fix it anyway.
And they're right. They're right to a point, but then they're the same guys that are pushing this as serving enterprise traffic and stuff like that. So they're having their cake and eating it too. But the fundamental problem is, as Russ alluded to, they wanted to fix as quickly as possible that didn't require them changing hardware. As long as they could fix it in firmware.
It's not a question of lazy. It's business.
It's business.
And back to your point about Microsoft, I want to, you brought the name up. Someone mentioned Microsoft by name.
You mentioned Microsoft.
And I want to make a point. If any one of you know me personally, you know I'm probably the biggest Microsoft hating bigot on the planet. But you would not have, I think it's fair to say, an 11i standard as good as it is today without the effort of a couple or 3 very, very key Microsoft engineers who participated in this body. And not only that, every time we got the draft in any kind of shape where it was possible to even think about implementing it, those guys would go home and code it up. And the next time we came back to a meeting, they had a list as long as your arm of there's a race condition here, or there's this problem there, or we found this, or we found that. They worked their asses off to make the specification as good as it is. Wouldn't you agree?
99%. On the other side of that is,
wireless zero config. So
No, on the other well, on the other side of that is they played the game very, very well to make sure EAP was central to the entire architecture.
And who owns?
Since we know this is all about
property?
money, and the way they pulled that off was very, very strategic and very insightful. If we had gone the way that other proposals were, the vendors of the NIC card would have had to write a key management solution in their driver. Microsoft said if you use AAP, Windows will do it for you. All you have to do is conform to these 3 driver calls. And everyone's like, go hire a bunch of engineers, write a bunch of code, debug it, interop with Microsoft anyway in a driver. Or
Never screw up drivers.
or just let Microsoft do it. They sold that in one meeting.
That's the counterexample to your showing up with something and having everybody embrace it, right?
They can't, because the argument was, here's a way you can save a pile of money.
But I guess then the whole problem is that you come down to, is this like an open standard or is this a Microsoft standard?
It's an open
So it's
standard.
the same problem again.
Everyone who had voting rights thought letting Microsoft control that aspect of the spec was a good idea.
Well, they didn't control it. They just got to the plate with the idea, and I think it was the right idea.
Perhaps.
You know?
That's not the
It
point of it.
It wasn't just a Microsoft solution. The basic idea was do it this way, and the operating system vendor has to implement this part. The driver vendor writes drivers for his card, and it's a division of labor question.
But what they did is raise the bar on all the other operating system vendors.
Well, I think what they did too is
So
because of
there's-
the IP issues that are revolving around that piece too.
But
So they're
there's-
essentially locking everyone else out as well.
But there weren't any IP issues in this
No,
place.
there's no IP.
Yeah, this was all open.
No,
So,
I
and,
saw it.
at the end of the day, we've got 3 major operating system players in the world today. You've got Microsoft with Windows, you've got Apple with their stuff, and you've got all the Unixes. And guess what? We all have a 1X solution. So what's everybody bitching about?
Right.
Works, right? Took a while, but it works. Yeah, I know it's not perfect.
No, I was in the
It works, and somebody somebody in this room want to make a lot of money, go implement a cheap or free works at home 1X server.
If it's free, how do I make a lot of money?
Support, packaging.
Oh, that's what I want.
It should suck, but it should be free.
How do you deploy it?
So when you implemented .11i, and you chose not to protect the management frames, could you go ahead and clear that up? Was it just a time issue or
Nope.
a thought
Clear
process
text management
failure?
frames.
No, it wasn't. It was a charter question.
Is this our problem?
No.
No.
WEP didn't protect management frames. The solution was not chartered to protect anything that WEP didn't. It was never on the table for discussion.
Why not?
Because 11W was formed to solve the management frame
It
problem.
was a scope issue.
It was discussed, and the answer was, oh, we'll go do a follow-on, but we're not going to slow this down to broaden the charter.
All standards bodies have some mechanism to define and limit scope. No one in this room is ever going to complain the standard got done too quickly, right? It's always the other way. And
Can't you wield that as a weapon to pass the buck, though?
well, I'm sure that's what you think I'm saying, right?
There are many bucks passed in the 11i.
If you look back at 802.11/1999, the original spec, there's a metric buttload of security concerns that were just never addressed. No key management, no key distribution, no management frame protection, no replay protection, and I can go on and on and on and on and on. We picked up the ball, even though strictly speaking the 11i charter was fixed WEP. We picked up the ball and addressed a lot of these along the way because we could and it was the right thing to do. You want to fix management frames the right way? You think you'd have to recall hardware to fix WEP. Let me tell you, you're going to have to junk everything you own.
Right. There was no way the legacy hardware could be made to protect management frames.
And there's
silicon changes were needed, so it was no way it was going to get done in 11i.
Very, very, very fundamental frame changes were needed. And so there's a fix in the works, but I'll tell you the same thing I tell when I speak on this topic. don't expect a fix anytime soon, and don't be surprised if the fix that comes out doesn't answer all the questions. Okay? Because you want it done perfectly, we're going to have to start from the ground up.
And there's no economic reason to incent the vendors to spin new silicon and break backward compatibility. So therefore, I predict it won't happen.
Right. And the scope issue is very big because you could say we want to protect all these things, and it will never happen. The standards body will never get off the ground. So it is limited to a scope problem. We have problems with management frames. It keeps me employed. So that's just one of the things that we live with in specification.
And most of the management frame problems, not all, that people carp about really boil down to yet another denial of service attack, or as an enabler to another attack. And again, your wireless network isn't robust. Get over it.
That's not true once 11K gets deployed.
Right.
I'm positive. with 11K, you will be transmitting in management frames enough information to do triangulation based on what every other NIC is receiving. That is what got 11W finally passed.
Dissension among the ranks.
So,
you just want to come up and share?
Honorary panel member.
Come on up, Doug.
So I went to work for a vendor a year ago, and it really opened my eyes to what the requirements are for standards bodies. And I used to say bad things about standards bodies before, and now I have a lot of respect for standards bodies. The panel here, I have a tremendous amount of respect for.
You've never been to one then?
So the room filling up with 5-letter company names, at the last moment, that bothers me. But
It should.
the people at the panel here, I have a tremendous amount of respect for. My gripe with standards bodies is that other committees don't learn from past mistakes. A couple of examples. The Bluetooth SIG decided to write their own crypto algorithm called E0. Hello, that smells just like web. It was designed for 128-bit security.
No, that smells more like GCN.
Well,
yeah, okay.
the other thing you have to, this is what I call the smart engineer syndrome. And this is what the problem with WEP initially was. I can just buy Bruce Schneier's book, Applied Crypto. I am now a cryptographer, right? And smart engineers think, hey, well, it's simple, right? And the problem with security is, we have a balance between art and science, and the engineers are used to working just from science, for the most part, and so they don't have this notion of, well, if I do this, then maybe using codebook is probably not the best approach here in a highly high data environment. So they don't have that experience, and so that's why you have these problems all the time with these standards bodies that are made up of engineers.
But it's the repetition of these past mistakes. WEP has no mutual authentication. The 802.16e, ratified late 2004, no mutual authentication is mandatory. How do we keep making these mistakes over and over again?
I can answer that one very pointedly, but I probably shouldn't. But the answer had to do with a particular bid that was on the street, and they had to meet a schedule that was, because all the vendors wanted to bid on it, and they wanted to bid a thing that complied with the standard. So even though they knew it had flaws, they got enough votes to just ship it.
I mean, the other is just a resource thing. There aren't that many security people worth their salt to attend all these things, right? I mean, participating in an IEEE standards process is close to a full-time job. It's probably minimum of 75%. If you get active and you're actually trying to help, it is a full-time job. So there just aren't enough of us to go around, And number one, and number two, most of us don't want to do it, So
we're getting a little lower on time, but next.
Yeah. Well, I was going to make a comment, which is that WEP is, on the one hand, a classic example of a huge pileup of how not to do something.
Absolutely.
On the other hand,
I bet college professors love it because it has every example of what not to do.
I actually know a number of faculty members who are using it as an example of what not to do.
On the other hand, it is wired equivalent privacy. And you have more security from web than if you plug yourself into a switch with a Cat5.
Not true.
But
That's
not for 300
true. That's
yards
not
away
true.
line of
That's
sight.
not true. Because, and here, you know, if you guys walk away with a phrase you can talk to your bosses about, remember this one. To attack a wired network, unswitched or switched, you have to be able to touch the wire.
Physical access.
Well, that's what I've said.
If you
have
can
to
hear
have
the
wires.
sound of my voice, you're in radio range.
You've got a wire there then.
Okay? So it's not as secure.
It's not.
It's a measurement of risk.
That was their goal, but at the time that it was developed, they had a huge imposition to overcome, and that was export controls.
Yep.
So they settled on 40 bits and claimed that 40 bits was equivalent to the wire. Okay? Now we can have that argument, but let's just say that's true. They didn't reach the 40-bit mark.
Mm-hmm. It's a 24-bit one.
I would argue they didn't reach that. The fact that they've made no requirement whatsoever about what should be done with the initialization vector, and that every time the system started, they all picked their own place, usually zero.
Zero, yeah.
Meant that replay gave the exact information the attacker needed to completely destroy the system on the second time they booted.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I don't think that's as good as a wire.
But I realize I'm being contrarian here. But
Good. That's usually what makes these.
But I know when I'm on a backbone that I get my security through SSL, IPsec, and other things. When I'm using web, I get my security through SSL, and it provides a no trespassing sign.
Right.
My counter-argument to that.
John, you're bringing up the classic, if I use end-to-end encryption, I'm okay. And to some extent, that's true, but that doesn't mean that hop-by-hop security needs to be ignored as well. And it depends on how you're going. In the classic enterprise space, end-to-end is probably sufficient. But if you start to look at peer-to-peer and the other ways that wireless is now being used, hop-by-hop becomes incredibly important.
Absolutely.
Because now you're doing routing at layer 2, and that's something that people never really anticipated happening when these things were being done.
Yep.
Well, some of them anyway.
I'll get to you in a second. I want to say one more thing, and that is that we're now seeing arguments in the IETF about the fact that IP addresses are in the clear when IPsec is used, and the amount of traffic analysis that permits. And everyone says, oh, well, just turn on web, or turn on .11 TKIP or CCMP or whatever. So, I mean, the bottom line is each layer offers different protections, and you can't ignore them in your system analysis. Question here?
I was just going to say the counter-argument to the web being secure is that at least with end-to-end SSH tunneling on the backbones, you're not telling the consumer this protects you.
Don't bring marketing into a technical discussion, please.
That's a whole nother.
Exactly what you're doing.
There's one way back.
What are your thoughts on the whole pre-release of hardware against standards that have to be ratified? Thinking the pre-N stuff.
It
Belkin
sucks,
needs to be
but it's
smacked.
about money.
It's about grabbing the market.
And do you think that if I subscribe by a pre-N thing right now, that
You should have your head examined.
that was
Yeah, I mean, pre-N, you ought to pay attention. I mean, if you're going to make that risk, you better do your homework on who's sending all the people with the voting rights into the rooms at the right time, because N has been highly contentious for years.
They were pissing when we were working on that.
It's really contentious, and so if you think there's going to be no changes, I'd be shocked. and make sure that, so your risk assessment really is, will the changes be made in places where firmware upgrade is possible?
Or do you want to just lock into one vendor?
You know, if you're a consumer and you're looking for, you know, to replace that 5-year-old AP at home, knock yourself out. What's your risk there? At $100 for the AP and $50 for the card. So if you have to replace one or the other, or, you know, 2 or 3 units, it's no big deal. If you're an enterprise and you're dealing in hundreds or thousands of units, you're out of your mind to buy that stuff.
The real question is who was the genius that decided to use 40 megahertz channels on 802.11b spectrum?
It had there was a huge discussion. I had nothing to do with this. It was
Okay.
Start there. Right. But that had to do with discussions with the FCC on where free spectrum would be available.
So where do you put the second non-overlapping AP?
It's not just the FCC. Remember, this is a worldwide. This is a worldwide specification. So every post and telecom authority in the world.
Well, where do you put the second non-overlapping AP when it's 40 megahertz channels on BG?
At node 42. There's a question over here, sir.
As somebody who participates in NANOG and ARIN meetings as kind of a fixture there and routinely has to take heat from people for being, quote, part of the problem because you do not come to IBTF, which is the Internet Vendor Task Force.
Thank you very much.
I'm curious from input from those of you who have had success in convincing your employers that supporting standards processes is a good idea, that doing things in the public interest is a good idea, that you know, sure, we can't show direct bottom line benefit from this, but that it is in their interest in the larger sense to send me to things like this. I'm interested in what you have been able to convince people of.
And then there's those of us who don't have an employer who would even think of sending to anything like that, but wanting to be able to participate just out of altruistic intentions and helping the public.
Well, let's talk about what it costs.
In the ITF, at least, you can always do that with the working group minutes.
Right. So you could participate in the ITF without ever doing anything but having an email address.
Correct.
And your voice on the email list has, by operating rules, I believe, exactly as much weight as if you showed up at the meeting and screamed at the top of your lungs.
True.
The IEEE doesn't work that way, unfortunately. But the barrier to participate is, other than the travel involved, really isn't that high. It's I think that the last one I went to cost about $500. That's for a week. It includes your lunch meal.
His point is the real cost is your labor.
Yeah, and then the week out of the office.
And I hear you, and I know that I can very easily vary the time that I spend participating in lists on company time and stuff like that. But in order to have my participation really be defensible, and any kind of, I have unfortunately calibrated my boss to expect a higher level of productivity from me. I perhaps made a mistake on the way in and not slacking off enough to be able to take up these altruistic things in my copious spare time. We all have that.
Do you want to respond to him?
Yeah, I want to respond because I work for a small company and actually participate in things where my participation is completely altruistic, meaning I won't get any money from it, I won't build any products. You have to look at where you want to do things, and my rule of thumb is that I say, will my participation in this standard be something that tips it from failure to success? And if the answer is no, if the answer is these are basically good guys, and while I'm going to grit my teeth over some parts of it, it'll be basically okay, I let them do it. I look for things where I will make a difference. And that is my criteria for where I put my time.
Now, just towards the end of this, I want to ask you guys, we all kind of agree that the system's not perfect, it's rough around the edges.
Really?
I mean, just pie in the sky, what sort of things do you think can be better to, how do we fix this thing? We're saying, what are these guys thinking? How do we, fix this thing? It's nice to bitch about it.
Here's a specific question along those lines. I work for Juniper Networks. I support our NAC solution. I'm active in Trusted Network Connect, which is the industry open architecture. And I participate in that work group because we get shit done, because we're all in there trying to accomplish something. The IETF chartered a network endpoint assessment work group. I'm trying to figure out whether it's worth putting my time into that. From the outside...
Others in Juniper are.
Pardon?
Others in Juniper are.
Absolutely, and so I may be redundant. That's a different issue. But the issue I'm looking at is, it really looks to me like some of these standards bodies are trolled into almost a standstill by companies who are participating not with the intent of improving the standard, but with the intent of slowing down the process because they get political or economic benefit from it. How do you solve or even mitigate or even live with that problem in the standards bodies?
That's where Robert's Rules of Order kind of comes into play, to not only slow it down, you know, but also sometimes as a club to get it moving. But with the ITF, well, Russ is better to talk about it than I, but the interesting thing is you bring up the alliances that are created now. A lot of, I think, you know, a lot of the bigger companies, because maybe because they lost control of some of these things, started creating alliances to create de facto standards, right? And so, is that any better or worse? I think you can argue both sides of it. From the big companies' perspective, it's better, right? Because a couple of big guys get together and they force something out, leaves the little guys behind. You know, from the little guy's perspective, it's much worse, right? So I'll let Russ argue that.
TNC is a closed system. You have to pay to be a member. So there's a barrier to entry right there that doesn't exist in the IETF. But TNC was created because there wasn't an IETF work group working on the endpoint compliance at the time.
Actually, that's not true.
Usually the other thing about these alliances is you have to agree to share IP, right? You have to bring IP into the game in order to join. If you don't have IP, you're not joining. So these alliances are completely different beasts that are interesting in their own right.
As I am not a member of, nor will I ever be, of TNC, right? And yet they asked me to review the spec. So they gave me a non-disclosure agreement that said I couldn't speak publicly negatively if I read it. So I refused to sign it.
Good on you.
So I never saw the spec. And yet, I was the guy who shepherded the creation of NEA. Because my view is that if we get the solution out in the open and talk about it, we will ultimately end up with a better answer.
So, if the ultimately, you know, because what I come from is trying to get stuff running in people's networks. And so I'm looking at what is the path where I can contribute the most towards getting stuff running in people's networks. And to me, I don't, you know, I'm really new at this whole standards thing, and clearly starting in the TNC, I'm not starting with the big boys, because you know, I don't think I'm qualified to, frankly. But
yes,
how do you compare?
Yes, you are. Sure you
are. How do you compare getting stuff done versus doing something that's going to take 3 years because there are forces that are actively working against getting stuff done?
That's a trade-off, and I truly believe that it's worth the investment to ultimately reach that consensus, because when you do get all the different aspects of the problem aired and discussed, that what you end up with is a more economically viable solution because more people have bought into it, and you get a stronger solution because everybody's viewpoints have been taken into account.
I want to address something you said. Your words were, "I'm not qualified," or "I don't feel qualified."
Yeah, that's just wrong.
That's just wrong. Okay, now, you know, Bill's got a PhD. Mathematics?
No, it's animal science.
Well, I think that shows it.
You go to an IEEE meeting, the first one you go to, you're intimidated as hell because you're sitting in a room full of you know, the guys that designed the silicon, right? We're talking very, very, very smart people. But wait a minute, I can sit here in front of you and tell you I had a bachelor's degree in mathematics that I have not used in the 25 years since I graduated. I was an artillery officer in the Army, for God's sakes, for 10 years. And
what?
Yeah, cannon cocker. Huh?
What?
Yeah, huh? But did I contribute to the spec? You're damn right I did, because I brought the perspective of people in this room, the attackers, you know, how does the bad guy think perspective to the specification discussions. You know, that's what I concentrated on bringing in. If you have a perspective, a point of view that's not present in the room, you're damn right you're qualified to be there, even if you know nothing about the low-level technical parts.
Well, you also have to make a decision when you participate. as to what level and goal you have. I think of 3 different levels of people who participate. One is kind of the lurker, who's really just there to listen and to run home and tell his management what's going on. And that requires one level of time and financial commitment. The next level is where you want to influence the solution, and that's what Al's talking about, where you want to not be the guy with the pen, but you want to be the guy who's making sure that some community who's going to use the ultimate product is well served by it. And then the third one is the guy who's going to drive the solution. He's the guy who's going to try and become chair or editor or some key role in the group. And frankly, that's a full-time decision.
And the derailment. You forgot the class that is the derailment class.
I was speaking of the constructive participant, but you're right. And I've seen examples where a large company has sent someone to delay.
So we appear to have about 30 seconds. Let's take one last question.
We spoke at the beginning about the Michael integrity check issue. There's another integrity check I think that's missing from the IEEE, the big business integrity check. Is it really appropriate that, I don't want to name names like Cisco, but that large companies will show up with 70 people at the time for the vote? Yeah. I mean, is that something that should be resolved? They haven't been working there, but there were 2 guys and now they're all allowed to vote. Is that something that should be addressed maybe?
I'd like to see it addressed, but at the same time, changing the set of rules under which not just IEEE 802, but all IEEE standards organizations, of which there are over 1,500, are operating is there's tilting at windmills, right?
It's never going to happen.
Broken as designed.
No, it's IEEE on a scale basis. It's not that broken. It works amazingly well, even though we're all sitting here complaining.
You did put out a good standard.
We raised the bar.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody who came out and potentially be screwballed and everything. Thank you for coming out Sunday morning. Thanks, Bill.
Nobody got the hat. Nope.
Next time, say
That was good, but maybe you guys weren't on.
You guys have been there.
I totally screwed up my issue.
So where you working now?
I work for the Sherp same way. I love beds.
I used to do that for a living. I'm going to sign up. We'll do so. I will. If you're coming back, I'll just join you. You want to stay here? I've been wearing it. Someone was asking me for a hand job, so I said, how about this? Why don't we do scratch that and go for R-A-D-I-S.
I love the shirt.
Yeah.
I hope you
they're doing something good. Yeah, it's everything.
Cool. We'll get a drawing range. Right about here.
So you can join this one. We're already waking up.
I have pocket roll. But none of them will go inside. You helping me all week.
Oh, man.
The rest of you are fair game. I'm sitting in front of you.
So why me? Remember though, when you let one fly, you just left your hand.
I tried. Just now. Honestly, at this point, I don't even use my name anymore. I'll just go by Steve. Well, my name is more well known than my handle. Read this error because of all the stuff I do.
And did the previous error involve that model?
Right. Right.
Yep. Breakfast of Champions.
Some administrative notes before we get started. Yes. Okay. I haven't said anything, so you can answer it all you like. Right. Okay, the vendors are running contests still. Some of them I think are closing the contest down shortly after these talks end here. But if you haven't gone to the vendor booths, please go. Drop your name in. They've got some really great swag to give away, and you know, the chances are probably still pretty good that you can win if you stop by. Or if you're Renderman and maybe statistically one, he will win. He seems to win everything all the time. Is Render even here?
He was here 5 minutes ago.
He'll be here in a second. He's everywhere. He's nowhere. He's Renderman. The other odds and ends. Hacker Arcade, if you can, if you've been playing, please go and redeem some tokens when you get a chance. We got lots of prizes, and they're getting cheaper by the minute. And if you haven't played, please take some time to go play. Perfect opportunity is going to be in an hour when we have to take down one of the air walls in here. And so it's the air wall from day one that didn't exist on day one and exists now. They're going to go retract that and set up some more chairs. Great time to go over to Hacker Halo, or Hacker Arcade. Have I been saying Hacker Halo the whole time? No. Yeah, all right, Hacker Arcade. Yes. Shut up. Hacker Arcade, play some games, give some money to the EFF, and then go redeem them for really cool prizes, because the Ninja Ducks and the Pirate Ducks can have little battles in my tub in my room later if you want. As long as you'll join me. Nice. That's nice. Thank you. Any other announcements? Am I forgetting anything? All right. So, you want to? All right. I'm gonna kick this off then. This is the Own the Con BOF. I guess it's still technically this is a BOF. We're trying to make this interactive, as interactive as possible. This is our attempt to be transparent about what went on in the last 3 days and transparent about what went on in the last 362 days leading up to the conference. This is our opportunity to let you know all the guts and gory details of what happened, what we think went good, what we think went bad, and it's also the opportunity for you to tell us what you think went good and what you think went bad.